You ever just sit back and reminisce on school and how terrible it was, and you start thinking about all the wild friends you met, and then that one teacher that you played the PS with at the top of the school, but then you realize that you may just be schizophrenic because you were talking about GTO, as in great teacher. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant great teacher Onizuka, my bad. The story focuses on a 22-year-old gang member, well, ex-gang member, Ikichi Onizuka, who became a teacher. This sounds very bland until you realize the students that he's teaching are a bunch of delinquents that want this man gone and put him through the ringer to get him to quit. I'm not even going to be ashamed to say this, but I watched the anime first, and then I went and read the manga, and that's the reason why I'm making a video now. But the anime left out a lot of certain things, like why he wanted to become a teacher. So before we can meet these students, the manga actually shows Onizuka in his younger years as a gang leader. His skills will push him forward in being what he always wanted to be, a great man. His good friend would tell him his leadership is a true skill that can take him somewhere. Being someone who doesn't really give up easily, he gave the construction a chance, said fuck it, and went right back to the streets. So he finds a girl, loses her to an old man. He realized that he could test his riz in the classroom and immediately wanted to be a teacher, and thus the story would start. Yep, he became a teacher because he could hit on girls. Please don't leave. Onizuka would pull up to the school and he's already getting fantasies. His first class would be full of delinquents, and one kid would even spit in his face. Enraged by this disrespect like anybody would, he can't really do anything about it because he's, well, a teacher. These delinquents are on a new level of savagery, as they would quite literally set Onizuka up. As Onizuka would continue his depressing state of teaching, he would have one girl in the class that caught his attention. He wouldn't really act on it until he was forced to, as later that day he saw her crying because she got kicked out and had nowhere to go and wanted to stay at his house. This may come off as abnormal, and it would be abnormal for all the wrong reasons, because when Onizuka took her home, guess what? It was a setup by the same kids from his class, and they would burst into the room with cameras. Yep, this was all a setup by the guys to blackmail Onizuka for 1 million yen, and the girl was in on it. Remember, Onizuka was literally a gang leader, so the get back was about to be very serious. So the same night, the young teens would be outside gloating about what they just did to him, and Onizuka would pull up to what seems to be about 30 deep. He would tell the students that it was time for revenge, and revenge how? Oh, by waterboarding all three of them and threatening that if he didn't become a teacher, he'll just, well, Onizuka now thinking for sure those kids were gonna tell and he could kiss those teaching ideas goodbye. He would ultimately be wrong, as all the students would actually grow to respect him and treated him like a god, except for one person, the girl that would set him up. After school, the girl's name that set Onizuka up was named Nanako. Nanako would try her best to get Onizuka's attention by sitting on his bike. He doesn't really want to fall for the same trick twice, so he would ignore her. She would then convince him to go to his house again by teasing him with second base. They would go back to his house and everything would be fine. The truth would come out later as he was taking her home. So Nanako would ask Onizuka to crash at his house for the night. Onizuka would refuse, and this will lead to her to be very dramatic, as she would jump straight off his bike and almost get hit by a truck. She would rather quit the game than go home, so she stayed at Onizuka's house for 3 more days. On the 4th day, Onizuka was about to do something that would have got him in an orange jumpsuit, but before he can go through with it, the truth would be revealed on why she actually didn't want to go home. Both her parents were workaholics. They worked so much that she had a big house but shallow parents that weren't really around, and even when they were around, they barely communicated. Her parents didn't even sleep in the same room, as there was a thick wall between their rooms. Now, the reason why she would end up telling Onizuka all of this after Lily set him up, he had ultimately gained her respect, as all the other students had respected him. And the fact that he didn't rat them out for actual blackmailing, and for the same that the students in return didn't tell on him. The night that she would go home, Onizuka would actually pull up in probably the most iconic panel in the entire manga. Onizuka would pull up shirtless, cigarette in one hand, sledgehammer in the other. Nanako's mom and dad would be very unhappy, as anybody would. He walked right up into her parents' room and commit crimes such as damage to property and breaking a hole in the wall in dips. Now, I do want to be clear about this. Her parents aren't really bad people. They just didn't understand what their child wanted. A big house and being rich would be a done deal for most of us, but for her, she wanted a functional family and not two business parents. The next day, class would be pretty normal, and it's time for Onizuka to leave the school, as this was a walk-on job to see how well he would do. While he was checking his locker, he would get a letter from Nanako saying that she was thankful that he broke down that wall. After he left her and her parents, the two would talk for hours like they used to. While they were waiting for the hole to get fixed, they would stop yelling at each other and even started spending time together. She would point out how her mom and dad would lock eyes and smile, but after the wall would get fixed, they would ultimately go back to not talking to each other. But those few days of seeing her parents in good spirits would encourage her to make that happen again. The same way Onizuka broke down that wall piece by piece, she wanted to do the same with her parents. This early part of the manga actually shows how far Onizuka is willing to go to help his students. He wants the best for his students while also showing and teaching them a lesson, while also making it as funny as possible without even trying. Like when he became a teacher at the school he became the GOAT at, his first troubled student would be Noboru. Noboru was a small nerdy kid that would get bullied for, well, being a nerd. With words of encouragement and wanting to play Resident Evil, Onizuka would actually befriend the kid, and then the real problems would rise as Onizuka was literally being framed with Photoshop to the entire school of him doing some very not safe for work thing. Now, we live in the year of 2023. It is pretty easy to spot the difference in Photoshop. Well, Great Teacher Onizuka takes place in the 90s, so whatever was on photo was law because it was almost unheard of to use Photoshop around that time. The students behind this would be 3 students I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. Their plan was to frame Onizuka, giving him a bad rep and forcing him to quit. Now, Onizuka wasn't really someone to back down, so it was Onizuka versus the 3 students. Then the next day, they would Photoshop this. Yeah. Onizuka would actually find out who was doing the framing, as he would boldly, even outright say he did it. And his name would be revealed to be Kikuchi. Instead of reporting Kikuchi to the principal's office, he would actually ask him to Photoshop some stars' faces on it so Onizuka can have some fun time when he gets bored when he goes home. As bad as being framed for weeks into doing things and people believing that you were doing things that it was actually not true, to him basically say, hey, you got a really good skill. I actually want you to help me. And you may think he's joking, but he was dead serious on Kikuchi looking out for him. So, and Kikuchi realizing that Onizuka was a very different teacher from the last teacher they ran into, he would ultimately join Onizuka's team. So that's 1 student down and 4 more to go. Not 4, 3. I'm not going to expand on how messed up these girls are because that'll take forever, but trust me, they got some serious issues. The most important person in this group I really wanted to speak on is Mirai, as his problem with Onizuka is valid for his age, and his story with Onizuka showed a perfect example of the entire manga. Mirai straight up just hates Onizuka. Well, he hated Onizuka. He was also part of the crew that wanted Onizuka fired, as the rest of the students were doing it for kicks, but this was a little more expansive for Mirai. Mirai has a really young mom, like she had him at the age of 13. Her parents screamed at her and demanded that she got rid of the baby, but refused. Thus, Mirai was born. Her parents seemingly cut off ties with her, so it was just really her and Mirai with no father or family other than his mom. This would cause him to be a very protective of his mom. She even said that he had a complex. These problems would come to light when Onizuka would meet his mom at a restaurant and Mirai was not feeling it. He was extremely emotional about his mom talking to Onizuka. He knew Onizuka was looking at his mom with lust. Well, he was right, but Onizuka would play it off as if he wasn't, and he would kind of really frame it in a way that Onizuka would just that he hated him for no reason. Being young, dumb, and emotional, he wanted to literally erase Onizuka off the panels. He tried it, but failed. His rage would continue as even in class, Onizuka yawned, and he immediately assumed that Onizuka hit his mom, and this would top it off with the other students would gaslight him, and this would add more fuel to the fire. He hated the fact that Onizuka was coming up to his mom, coming up to his house to hit on his mom, Well, that really wasn't the case. As much as Onizuka would cop a peek at his mom because, well, he's him, the reason he was talking to his mom was because that Mirai was actually failing classes and could be pulled out of the school. Onizuka even risked his own job by stealing the grade files to show his mom. Now, this doesn't stop him from trolling Mirai, as later in the manga, Onizuka and Mirai's mom would go bowling, and Mirai was heated that Onizuka kept trying to get in close to his mom. Onizuka and Mirai would end up in the same team, and this panel, for some weird reason, just made me laugh for no reason. And the amount of trash talking between them made reading this even better. You can see Mirai hates Onizuka because he's an adult. Onizuka has a problem with Mirai for not wanting to man up. This would become apparent when Mirai and his crew would get caught up in a street problem with some other kids. Onizuka would show up, but not to save him at first, but to teach him a lesson. That lesson being for him to bungee jump off a bridge to test his courage, something that Mirai lacked. After this, Onizuka and Mirai would become almost like a brotherly friendship, as all he really wanted for Mirai was to actually be a man. In the manga, you would actually see he would boil up and be mad and run away from his problems, as Onizuka kind of forced him to deal with that head on. Through all the things Onizuka did for his students, puts him leagues ahead of what any teacher would ever do. He went above and beyond for a bunch of hurt kids that needed someone but was conditioned to not trust adults, let alone a teacher, or just outright bullied into silence. The school in GTO was a lot like school for me and probably you. It's a dog eat mentality with invisible hierarchies. Nanako was a girl that tried to get him caught up and fired all in the same night just to find out she only wanted attention because her parents felt more like associates than her parents. Onizuka literally broke down a wall between mom and her dad. Noboru was a little kid that got bullied all the time for little to no reason and almost left the game. Onizuka saved this kid not once but twice, even though he pushed him the first time by accident. He would become good friends with him and they would play video games almost all the time after school. Kikuchi was a smart kid. He photoshopped Onizuka's face onto some very wild things. His issues grew from trusting teachers before that would ultimately let him down. Onizuka praised his skills and asked him to Photoshop faces on other modules so he could, well, Mirai was a kid that was misunderstood while misunderstanding situations. He became overprotective of his mom when Onizuka came along. He didn't know how to man up or face situations head on. Instead, he'd get emotional and run away. Onizuka would ultimately be the best person he could have met, as Onizuka would teach him courage and how to stand up even when the situation is difficult. There are more students he would help in the manga, but I'll leave that up to you to read on. Onizuka is what he said he wanted to be, a great teacher. In order to be great, you have to go the distance and do what many won't do in order to be great. He wasn't just a teacher in the classroom. He was a teacher of life outside of the classroom. He showed them what it means to live and stand by what you believe is right. He is the true definition of what it is to be a great teacher.